So yes, I'm going to spend 20 minutes talking to you about Azure Virtual Desktop and the experiences I have with customers, financial services customers. So my name's Ian Warren. I am a senior product manager on the AVD engineering team. And let's just go through the agenda for the next 20 minutes or so. So we're really going to drill down and look at some of the financial services use cases. So where is AVD working particularly well within financial services? Look at some AVD key concepts. I'm conscious that we need to be inclusive. You know, we take for granted that everybody knows about AVD. Not everybody on this call may know everything about AVD. So I really want to just spend just 10 minutes just going through some of the key concepts, which puts us all in a really good place when then we're talking to or learning more about some of the more advanced topics and areas later on in the session. And I also wanted to spend, from my perspective, what I'm seeing is some of the top trending features. So what are our customers using? What are financial services customers using from AVD? So let's looking at some of the recent announcements and seeing what's being deployed across the financial services sector. Okay, so use cases. So top of mind really is data security, not just for banks and other financial service organizations, but for everybody. But more so for the banking industry, because it's such a highly regulated industry and compliance is absolutely top of mind. And the idea behind using AVD addresses the issues of not having or mitigating against the risk of leaving data on devices and applications. So if you can keep your data and your applications in a central location and leverage AVD to access that, then that will hopefully ease the pressure in terms of the data security obligations that you have within financial services. Offshore developers is a really interesting one. So we see a lot of customers, a lot of financial services organizations take advantage of being able to have developers access desktops from India, for example, or other offshore locations. So being able to provide a personal desktop or a desktop which is in a UK region, which is close to the applications that they're developing against, really does open up a really interesting use case. And we see that across quite a few number of financial services customers. Disaster recovery and business continuity as well. So if you have an on-premise virtual desktop infrastructure today, you'll be familiar with the idea behind, you know, what happens if that data center was offline? How are you going to provide access to those desktops and to those applications? With Azure Virtual Desktop, you can effectively take advantage of our highly available, resilient architectures. You can take advantage of things like availability zones, geographical replication to make sure that your data and your desktops are available all of the time. Mergers and acquisitions. Okay, so this is a really interesting one, right? You'll all be watching the news, you'll all be familiar with mergers and acquisitions that are happening within the banking industry today. And of course, for those organizations that are making the acquisition, you need to think about what would the plan be if it was you. How would you go about getting access to your applications and to your data? Would you take the existing laptops and devices, re-image them? Would you provide new desktops and laptops for those newly acquired users? Or could you leverage something like Azure Virtual Desktop, okay, where you just create a user account, ensure you have licensing, and ensure then that the endpoints from the acquired organization has access to an AVD client and therefore get access to that to those applications and desktops. So that's a really interesting use case at the moment. Okay, so let's just look at some of the key concepts then that sit behind some of those use cases. So effectively, again, I'm being mindful of that everybody will be familiar with AVD, so we'll go through this fairly quickly. So what is AVD? It's effectively a cloud-based solution that allows you to be able to access your Windows 10 and Windows 11 desktops from pretty much anywhere. You can also access Windows Server as well. It also allows you to be able to maintain full control over configuration and management. So you're not having to consider laptops that are all over the place in different locations and how you're going to provide update configuration management on those. You can focus on the configuration and management in a central location and update your images and have those images available on session hosts, which are accessible by users in remote locations. You also get the security and reliability of Azure. So we invest over $1 billion in security every single year. And a lot of organizations want to be able to tap into that investment, and rightly so. Why would you look to invest significant amounts of money and resource in security when you can leverage our investment? You can also optimize the cost with multi-session. So multi-session is the idea of having a single virtual machine and having many users on that single box. Therefore, you can drive the cost of your deployment right down, in contrast to a personal desktop where you have one user to one desktop. Because it's a cloud-based service, you pay for what you're using. So your IT spend is aligned to your business usage. So here's what you can do when you run AVD on Azure. You can access your organization's apps from pretty much any device. So if you have an iPad, if you've got an iPhone, if you've got an Android device, if you've got a MacBook, if you've got a Windows device, you can access AVD from all of those devices. You can create secure, customized PC experience for all of those users as well. So if your users remain or want to have their picture of their favorite dog on their desktop, then they can do so. If they want to scatter their desktop full of icons, they can do so. If you want to change things like text sizes for accessibility, then that's absolutely fine as well. All those settings completely customizable to give that great user experience. You can statify your custom apps and stream them to your users. So if you have legacy applications or applications that are latency sensitive, then you can have the application streamed or accessed remotely from the endpoint and make sure the application is close to that multi-tier application stack to give, again, that best user experience. We see that as quite a common use case in AVD. We also gain efficiencies by migrating our on-premises VDI to the cloud. So whether that's efficiencies in terms of operational activities or whether that's efficiencies in terms of the cost. You know, there are many efficiencies which you can gain from transferring your on-premises architectures into Azure using AVD. And if you've got on-premises architectures, maybe on Citrix or other platforms such as remote desktop services today, you'll be familiar with web servers and broker servers, gateway servers, licensing servers, all core key requirements that enable you to access your desktops and applications. The challenge that you have is all of this requires availability, resilience, it requires scalability, and it requires a lot of effort and resource and investment to maintain that. Now, if we switch over to AVD, what we have is we take that access tier, so the web access, the diagnostics, the gateway, the management, the broker, and the load balancing, and we look after that for you. We create that as a cloud service. It's automatically, elasticity there as a cloud service. You have scalability. It's highly available. So all you need to do is have the licenses to be able to subscribe and utilize those services. You as the customer need to make sure you have an Azure subscription, which will then in turn allow you to be able to provision Windows 10, Windows 11, Windows Server 2012 upwards, and your applications as well. And underpinning all of that, we have the compute, the storage, and the networking as well, all available for you to utilize. You just need to configure it to make sure it meets your own performance and budgetary expectations. Okay. So many of you will be familiar with enterprise scale, the guiding principles that ensure that you can deliver a scalable architecture to deliver your workloads, and the concept of landing zones. Okay, and with AVD, our enterprise scale documentation actually makes reference to how you can deploy AVD within an enterprise scale architecture. And this diagram here is no different. Effectively, what we have is we have a central hub virtual network, which will have core services such as Active Directory domain services. You may have firewalls in there. You may have a bunch of monitoring tools and services in there. And that hub network then connects out to what we call the spoke virtual networks, which then will consist of the workload specific resources, such in this case as Azure Virtual Desktop session hosts and virtual machines. This allows us to be able to scale out. Okay. And in turn, we have connectivity then to other Azure services such as Azure NetApp Files, or maybe Azure Files as well, that allows us to be able to leverage FS logics for profile containers that allows us to be able to roam across session hosts. Okay, so what do you need to get started with AVD? Well, you need an active Azure subscription. You also need an identity provider. So most of the banks that we work with or the other financial services customers are typically using Azure Active Directory connected to Active Directory domain services, which allows you to be able to replicate the objects such as user objects, computer objects, groups, and so on up into Azure AD. You need to have a supported operating system. So Windows 10, Windows 11. We no longer offer support for Windows 7. End of security updates support was expired, I think, in January of this year. So that's no longer applicable. So it's Windows 10, Windows 11 on the desktops now. You need to have network connectivity as well. So again, most financial services customers will have an express route circuit, and they may choose to leverage that to gain connectivity from their on-premise location up to Azure and route the client traffic down there. Or they might be using an express route circuit to connect the session hosts back to application data that sits on premises as well. So most financial services organizations will have a Microsoft 365 license of some sort, typically an E3 or an E5 from what I'm seeing. And so by having those licenses, you automatically have the entitlement to use AVD. So no further licensing is required. You also need a remote desktop client. Okay, so yeah, that could be, as I said earlier, could be a Windows client, could be a Mac client, could be Android, and so on. Oh, seems to have lost my presentation. Yeah, I think I lost my presentation. Let me just try and share it again.
Yeah, we can see that.
Yeah, the presentation's dropped for me. Can you see the presentation okay?
Yeah.
Just give me 1 sec. We'll just try and share it again. Okay. Can you see that okay?
Yeah, looks good in.
All right, sorry about that. I don't know what happened there. Oh, okay, fine. Okay, so the remote desktop client. Okay, then that's fine. Right, so yeah, that was quite a whistle-stop tour in terms of top concepts or the key concepts for AVD. So just wanted now to talk to you about the trending features. So these are the features really that we're seeing across AVD, or for AVD for financial services customers. But before we do that, I just wanted to remind everybody about the innovation on the platform. So Azure Virtual Desktop became generally available in September 2019. So over the past, 3.5 years, we have had tremendous amount of engineering effort and innovation on the platform. So a number of features have been rolled out year on year, and you can see the progression. There hasn't been any slowdown as we react to customer asks and understand their challenges across their enterprises. And the good news is that we have an incredibly healthy roadmap, and we continue to commit to delivering those features as well. I know I've worked with some of you in the past or at the moment, and you'll be aware of some of the features that we are actually rolling out. I'm sure you'll be very excited to see those features coming over the next few months. Okay, so what I'm seeing are the trending features used by financial services customers. One of the things that I'm seeing is likes of banks and so on, they're using something called IDP ShortPath. And they're doing that because it allows them to be able to address this use case, which I talked about earlier, around applying or allowing maybe offshore developers from locations such as India. So RDP Short Path allows you to be able to connect directly from the endpoint to the session host. So normally what would happen is you would connect from the endpoint via the gateway, for example, in India, and then that in turn would facilitate a connection down to the session host using reverse connect on a TCP connection. With RDP Short Path, what will happen is the connection will be established over the gateway initially, and then it will flip over to a UDP connection, which will go direct to the session host. Okay, and that can be achieved over the internet, okay, using RDP Short Path over public, or it can be achieved by using RDP Short Path over private networks as well. So you can actually flip over to if you had a point-to-site connection, or a site-to-site connection or an express route circuit, you can use RDP Short Path over any of those types of connections. The net effect that we're seeing from customers has been really, really encouraging. If I was to demo RDP Short Path on my endpoint here, typically without RDP Short Path, we're seeing a round trip time of around about 30 milliseconds. RDP Short Path over private using a point-to-site VPN will then allow that to be sub 10 milliseconds, which is a significant improvement in the round trip time. Private link is in public preview, and again, we are working with customers and they are already piloting private link. Private link allows you to be able to ensure and mandate and guarantee that all the traffic goes over a private connection. Okay, so whereas RDP, it will, if you wanted to try to use a private connection, with private link, it will absolutely guarantee it's going to go over a private connection. It will not go over the internet. Okay, so what will happen is the endpoint will have a connection via, like I say, an express route circuit, point-to-site, or a site-to-site VPN. And then that connection will use the Azure Private Link service to be able to establish the connection into the session hosts. The other side of private link is that the session host and the agent, the AVD agent that sits in the session host, will talk over the Microsoft backbone, again using private link, whereas traditionally that traffic, that agent-based traffic, would go over the internet. Okay, so we're further securing RDP traffic for you. Another top feature that we see the likes of many of the banks I'm working with utilize is single sign-on and passwordless authentication, which is in public preview today. So this allows you to be able to get away from that two-step authentication model, which we traditionally have seen in the past. So normally what happens is you sign into Azure Active Directory and then you sign into the session host. So with single sign-on, you can literally just sign into Azure AD. The token is then passed to the session host, and so you'll get authenticated straight through to the session host. You can also leverage passwordless authentication, so things like Windows Hello for Business, or even FIDO2 keys, etc. Okay. Another one, which I'm seeing a lot of financial services organizations take an interest in, is watermarking, which is in public preview today. So watermarking is the idea of, unsurprisingly, having a watermark on the session host. So what this will do is, if I was to access a desktop, an AVD desktop with a watermark in it, and I was to take a picture of that session host and that data, it's going to have a watermark embedded within it. So then if that photograph was leaked, okay, you'd be able to track that I had taken the picture, what time I'd taken the picture, what day, and then obviously carry out the necessary investigations from there. So it's about handling that data loss prevention, which is so important to financial services organizations. And the last point on the slide is auto scaling. Okay, so a lot of the organizations that I've worked with within financial services have moved to Azure. Maybe it's because they've had to get out of data centers quickly. Maybe they're wanting to take a shift in terms of strategy, in terms of the VDI platform. And so it's been a case of let's just get everything into Azure straight away. And now they're going through a period of optimization. And one of those optimization tasks is auto scaling and setting auto scaling plans in place. So this is the idea of maybe having, say, 100 session hosts running at peak times, but during off-peak times, maybe during the evening, just drop that down to maybe 10%. Okay, so people can still log in, but then in the mornings, as people start to log in around 8 o'clock, 8:30, then those session hosts will scale out, allowing you to be able to accommodate more and more logins. Okay, so autoscaling is really key in terms of being able to drive the cost of your deployment right down. And the last slide from me. Should I go for Windows 10 or should I go for Windows 11? So I think most of the customers that I'm working with are either on Windows 11 or have plans to go to Windows 11 within the next 12 months. And my advice would be to go to Windows 11. And I'll give you two reasons why that is the case. The first reason is performance. So Login VSI did a study in May last year where they looked at Windows 10 and Windows 11 on AVD. And from the analysis that they did, they saw that the login times were reduced. They saw that CPU utilization was lower. They saw that the user input delay was even better. So the net effect of that was that we saw that Windows 11 provides users with a better experience for AVD. And also, in terms of the cost, because you've got lower CPU utilization, you can potentially get more users on a single box when running Windows 11. The second reason why I would say it's worthwhile you considering Windows 11 over Windows 10 is we are starting to look to prioritize within engineering Windows 11. An example of that when we're releasing new features is Endpoint Manager or Intune and user-based configuration for multi-session. So that capability has been available in GA for Windows 11 for several months. It's gone into public preview for Windows 10 last week. So, you know, we were looking to where we have to almost like prioritize Windows 11 and then what we call backport to Windows 10 within following weeks or following months. So if you're looking for the latest features, if you're looking for the best performance, my advice will be to go to Windows 11. Okay, that's everything from me. I'll now hand you back to Tam.